So Chris, occupational hygienist, I guess it's not something that everybody's trying to be at school. How did you get into it?
Well, certainly it wasn't something that I was trying to be at school, so I was always good at science. I always understood the sciences, and I did quite well with chemistry and physics in particular. Left school, didn't want to go to university immediately, so I was in the job market and ended up applying for a job in a laboratory, which I later found out was part of the health and safety executive, so the regulator. So that was a stroke of very good fortune. Spent 3 or 4 years in the laboratory analysing various samples, things that came in from down coal mines, places like that, and then just developed an interest as to where these samples were coming from, sort of the context of these samples. So I just sort of followed them upstream, and eventually I found myself in the workplace looking at health risk management.
And so what is an occupational hygienist really?
So an occupational hygienist basically looks after people's health in the workplace. We are the Chartered Society for Workplace Health Protection. We have the power, the potential to stop people being harmed by their work activities, to protect them from harmful exposures to noise, to dusts in the workplace.
So it's really focused on health and protecting people's
We
health.
are the health in health and safety, and we are focused on the workplace, on preventing harm from occurring in the workplace.
And your title is Principal Hygienist?
So I am now a Principal Occupational Hygienist within HSE's Science Division. So I work for the regulator, but not as an inspector. I am on the research side of the business.
That sounds very impressive. Is it something where you've had to do lots of study, get loads and loads of degrees? And...
I've not had to get, I have done a fair degree of study over the years. So as I say, I went into the job straight from school with A-levels. I eventually obtained a degree through day release, a chemistry degree, and by that point I was interested in occupational hygiene, so I went through what at the time was the BIOH module route to eventually obtain a certificate of operational competence, and then after a good deal of deliberation, more than should have been actually the case, I went and obtained my diploma and became a chartered occupational hygienist 13 years ago.
So it sounds quite complicated, but it's part-time study.
It's part-time study, and it's within reach of any intelligent person that's got the application to go for it. I wouldn't consider myself to be an academic genius by any stretch of the imagination. I understand science. I have a natural ability to get on with science, but it's very achievable for anyone that's got an interest in any kind of technical subject.
And it's quite a varied sort of job. You've seen quite a lot of different things, I think.
Yeah, we get involved in all kinds of industries. I've personally done work in waste and recycling, little bits of work in agriculture, construction, right up through to advanced manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing, major hazards, chemical industries. You'll find hygienists working offshore in oil and gas. I've not been offshore myself. We get into all kinds of interesting situations, yeah.
Well, most people haven't really heard of occupational hygiene. They hear of health and safety people and occupational health people. Why do you think people haven't heard about occupational hygiene?
I think that historically, as a profession, we've spent too long looking inward and talking amongst ourselves rather than talking to our customers and the marketplace. I think that is changing. We've done a lot of work. Let's look at construction, for example, an industry that really needed some support in managing health risks, and up until 10 years ago was largely going it alone, and by their own admission wasn't doing a great job in terms of managing health risks. We've done a great job with construction in raising the profile of occupational hygiene. You go onto a construction site now and people will understand what it is you do and what you're there to do and what you can do for them.
And quite often it's actually about prevention, so it's working before the problem starts.
Absolutely, we are at the prevention end of occupational health. So occupational health is this great big thing looking after people at work. It includes well-being, and it includes looking after people's mental health, and it includes the medical clinical side. But occupational hygiene has a very particular niche in there, and we are about preventing harm from occurring, not allowing people to be exposed As I say, it could be noise, it could be dust, it could be a range of things, but we are the preventative end of occupational health.
And so, I mean, if the kind of characterisation of the health and safety person that they're going around with a checklist, what would you say are the tools of the trade that an occupational hygienist might turn up to work with?
Eyes, ears, common sense. Obviously, you need a level of technical understanding. You know, we do have complicated equipment. We have sampling pumps. We can measure how much material's in the air. We can assess people's ventilation systems using sort of technical equipment to measure airflows and things. But basically, it's eyes and ears and an ability to communicate at different levels in the workplace. So we have to interact with the workers, we interact with management, and to understand where the health risks lie in that particular workplace, and to be aware of the options for controlling that risk, which is where your classical training comes in from your modules, from your certificate.
And obviously we've had COVID and all that kind of thing, but what do you think are the big workplace risks? What type of health risks do occupational hygienists think about?
Oh, well, there are still a lot of them. I mean, if you look at the sort of burden of occupational disease in the UK today, we still have much more occupational disease than we ought to have in the 21st century as a developed nation. And that disease is a result of exposures to dusts. We all understand, I think, as health and safety professionals, we all understand asbestos. That's the classic one, that's the big one, you know. Very harmful, carcinogenic, fibrous material. Unfortunately, it got everywhere in the world. In the 20th century, we installed asbestos all over the place, and we're still dealing with the legacy of that now. But there are many, many other dusts and fibrous materials out there. Silica, respirable crystalline silica is the big one that I'm particularly interested in. It's ubiquitous in construction. You can't go into a construction site and not see people being exposed to respirable crystalline silica, and it is harmful. Noise, you know, the amount of people that are suffering from noise-induced hearing loss, it's vast. These are thousands of people a year whose health has been damaged, whose life, the quality of life has been reduced as a result of needless and controllable exposures in the workplace.
And you say thousands of people, but I mean, obviously people, you know, worry about falling off ladders and, you know, safety incidents.
Yes.
Compared to safety, how much of a problem is health, do you think?
I mean, if you can, obviously you can tell different stories with statistics depending on which statistics you use, but I mean, a big one that we often go for is, you know, unfortunately we still lose around 150 people a year in this country in industrial accidents. That's 150 people too many. No, every one of those is a tragedy, and I'm not saying otherwise. But we lose 100 times more people to long latency occupational disease. So for everyone that dies in a workplace accident, which grabs the attention because it's immediate, you can see the cause and effect, 100 people will be dying of long latency disease quietly somewhere in a hospital or at home. And it doesn't have the same sort of attention grabbing factor as an accident has. But we should be thinking about these long latency illnesses as essentially a slow accident. That's what's happened to that individual. They have had a slow accident over 15, 20, 25 years of working with in a particular industry, and ultimately the unfortunate outcome for that individual is the same. They have a shortened life or a significantly reduced quality of life as a result of this slow accident that's happened to them.
So if it's, just take for example, if it's 100 times more people dying as a result of ill health, we've got thousands of safety professionals. How many hygienists are there?
Not nearly enough. So BOHS have around, I believe, 1,400 members. BOHS, as a professional society, you don't have to be qualified, or all you need to join BOHS is an interest in occupational health and worker health protection. So we have around 1,400 members in BOHS. Of that, we have around 600, I think, members of our sort of faculty of occupational hygiene, which is where the professional arm of occupational hygiene resides. So not nearly enough, less than 1,000 qualified professionally practicing hygienists in the UK at the moment.
And so is there a need, do you think, for more hygienists?
For sure. the market's crying out for hygienists. You know, I mean, I'm lucky enough to be in stable employment, but if I wasn't, I don't think I'd have any difficulty finding. There are plenty of vacancies going for hygienists. The demand is much more than currently we're able to supply to. You know, there's construction companies advertising for hygienists all the time. People in other industry sectors looking for hygienists. There is a great demand for us.
And you talk about industry sectors. Where would are you most likely to bump into a hygienist? Where do we find them?
Well, historically, our home has been manufacturing, heavy industry, coal mining. That's where the profession grew up. That's where we were kind of born and we cut our teeth. But more latterly, you'll find hygienists increasingly in construction. I keep mentioning construction, but I mean, it's a big industry. There are a lot of health risks in that sector and a lot of people exposed in that sector. But everywhere, as I say, from pharmaceuticals, oil and gas, healthcare professions, there are not nearly enough hygienists working in healthcare. There's a great need for us in that sector. You will find hygienists increasingly working in a diverse range of industry sectors, but still we're not nearly in every sector that we need to be in.
So lots of opportunity.
Sure.
So sort of, I hope you won't mind me asking a silly question, but your best day on the job, can you remember something that really stands out as a really enjoyable?
Wow, a really enjoyable day, goodness me. I think the sort of best experience that I have had as an occupational hygienist would have to be my involvement with the Breathe Freely in Construction campaign. Okay, so I mean, I've been kicking around in the world of occupational hygiene for sort of a long time before then, going into a lot of workplaces, hopefully solving a lot of problems and generating a lot of evidence for HSE on which to base our policy. But getting involved with Breathe Freely in Construction gave me the opportunity to interface directly with industry, an industry that were crying out for our help and really were asking for us to come on board with them. And you know, I found that an incredibly rewarding experience.
And the obvious question, what can you remember a bad day at the office, as it were, in terms of Breathe Freely?
In terms of
in terms of
occupational hygiene, you know, I can remember going into any number of workplaces where the standards were just, you know, way away from where they should be. I mean, obviously, as working for HSE in my day job, we occasionally get called into situations where, you know, there are significant failings in terms of health and safety. And I can, you know, I've been in a number of workplaces that really are very, very poor indeed. And you are immediately concerned for the people that are working in that environment.
And do you think this is a profession with a sort of strong future? No, is it something where there's a really good career prospect? Do you think
it has to be? As I say, there's a great call for hygienists out in industry. There's a great demand from the market. And the world is increasingly aware of health. You know, I think that was happening anyway. It was kind of accelerated through COVID. Everyone is now sort of really aware of what can happen if we don't control health risks in the workplace. And people expect more. People expect higher standards of protection for themselves and for their families and for their children. So I think health has got an increasingly high profile, and as a result of that, occupational hygiene will follow.
And you talk about the world. Obviously, occupational hygiene is a term that we use in the UK. Industrial hygiene is used.
In the parts of the world, yeah.
And globally, there's a big family, isn't there, of industrial and occupational hygienists. It's a big thing, isn't it?
It is a big thing internationally. I mean, the OHS are one of the leading international societies. I mean, you know, America is sort of the largest player. You know, there are sort of many thousands of hygienists practicing in the US. But yeah, internationally, the Australians have a very active society, the Malaysians have a very active society, various societies across Europe, you know, Belgium and the Netherlands. Yeah, we are part of a large sort of international family of practitioners in occupational or industrial hygiene, whichever one you want to call it.
And the International Labour Organization has just elevated health and safety to be a higher level of human right, as it were,
yep.
and a healthy environment is there. Do you think that there's something really important around the contribution of what occupational hygiene can give to people in work? Is it something that's going to really change the world?
It has to. We you know, as I said, just in the UK alone, there are still far too many people working in conditions that are exposing them to things that are going to harm their health. Globally, there are millions and millions of people working in very poor conditions. And part of the solution to getting people out of these poor working conditions has got to be the application of basic occupational hygiene principles. Prevent people from being exposed to harmful substances, physical agents, noise, whatever it is. Prevent that exposure from occurring in the first place. You'll prevent the harm from happening. And occupational hygiene is the profession that has the knowledge to do that.
It's exciting stuff, isn't it? Changing lives, changing
It absolutely is. I mean, I've been 36 years now in occupational hygiene related work, and the variety is enormous, and the rewards are enormous. It really is a very engaging and interesting profession to get into.
Fantastic.
So, Kevin, obviously, the further we get into the 21st century, sustainability is becoming a bigger and bigger issue globally. We all recognise the need for a sustainable society, sustainable civilization. So where does occupational hygiene fit into that agenda? I'm thinking specifically here about the environment, which is obviously something that's in everyone's mind to some extent.
Well, it's a really interesting problem because we tend to think about things like health and safety as restricting and sort of red tape and stopping us from doing things. But the reality is that the healthy working environment is a microcosm, a small example of the bigger environment. If you put dust into the working environment, that dust is going to go somewhere. And the evidence of the environmental monitoring in London, for example, in the area that you really are interested in terms of construction dust is not just affecting the workers, but then it's going out into the broader environment. Between 5 and 8% of the environmental pollution in London comes from construction. So if it escapes into the workplace, then it's going to escape into the broader environment. And so they're kind of logical things. You know, you put something toxic into the workplace, it's going to be, if it's bad for human beings, it's going to be bad for everybody else. So if the more that we can use the sort of the occupational hygienist mantra of, you know, the hierarchy of controls, that eliminate or substitute, the more that we can get bad things out of the environment, then that's going to protect workers, but it's also going to protect other people. But there are other things that are kind of perhaps less obvious links to the environment. So for example, you know, you mentioned respirable crystalline silica, which is something that comes out, as far as I understand it, from chopping up things like concrete blocks. So concrete block, you get some rock and you crush it up to create the base cement, and then you add heat and you compress it and you use loads of energy and you encapsulate that energy into the concrete block and you transport it somewhere, and it's the wrong size, so then you get more energy to transfer into it in order to cut it up. And what you're doing is creating waste, and then what's left over is a bit of concrete block that you're not going to use, and you have to transport that away, find something to do with it. But you're also creating a load of noise, a load of dust, and wasting a load of energy in that whole process. Now, we think very carefully about the sort of carbon cost, the carbon footprint of things. Well, actually, when you're reducing the carbon footprint of a lot of these things, you can actually reduce the health impact at the same time. And linking those two things together is really important. So in some ways, one of the things I think occupational hygiene can do is it can help focus on better planning and better thought about the environmental impact, but it can also link to things like sort of energy security and sustainability. And that's part of this bigger notion of sustainability, the idea that we don't waste things. And the obvious biggest waste that you can have in human society is wasting humans. And we've had, you know, maybe arguably 2 industrial revolutions, and we're going into this 3rd industrial revolution of low carbon economy. And the first 2 were built on the backs of human illness. You know, miners going down and being exposed to silicon, etc. This third third industrial revolution, we want to make sure it doesn't harm the planet, that it doesn't harm creatures, it doesn't harm the general population, and it shouldn't certainly be built on the back of harming individuals, because those individuals, if they can't work, they need to be supported, and there's a cost to society. So there's a bigger picture in terms of sustainability. The environmental part of sustainability is vital. Climate change is incredibly important, and occupational hygiene again can offer something really important. I know that it's something that's very relevant to your thoughts and work, is that you create more batteries, you're exposing people to different types of substances in the workplace that can make them ill and indeed pollute the environment. So we need to perhaps rethink some of the areas of occupational hygiene, from the hydrocarbon sector, where there's great occupational hygiene expertise, into new sectors of environmentally conscious and low carbon type of activities, where we can potentially protect lives in a way that we didn't do when we were mining coal or even building computer chips.
For sure. So another element of the sustainability agenda that we have to consider are the economical aspects of it. Okay, we all agree that the environment's important, we all agree that health and safety is important, but ultimately, if we can't afford things, then we have to do some sort of balancing calculations in it. So how does occupational hygiene play into the economical aspects of sustainable development?
So take our biggest costs in society. So if you look at the biggest burden in society, and it's perhaps a reflection of the success of development, our biggest costs are healthcare, and in development economies in particular, social care. So the need to look after people in their older life and the need to protect people and preserve their health. The more people you make ill, the more demand you put on healthcare, the more you divert from things that can't be avoided in terms of some genetic diseases, the more you create a demand for healthcare, the greater cost you have. The more you create disability, hearing loss, the more you are creating a need for enhanced social care. Mm-hmm. So if you can make people more productive, healthier, more engaged in the workplace for longer, if you can prevent them from needing healthcare unnecessarily, then you can actually shift the burden of economic costs backwards. You can actually save money. We looked at some figures around COPD, a breathing disorder, and sort of worked backwards in terms of, if you took some preventative action so that there were fewer COPD cases in the UK, how much would that save in terms of healthcare costs, in terms of taxation loss, in terms of benefits? And you're talking about £1 billion a year or more that you could save if you simply did quite sensible, achievable and easy things for respiratory care. So one is reduce the cost and burden of care and social. The other thing about the economics of occupational hygiene is that a lot of the things that we do, we just do them in the same way as we've always done. So we build in the same way. If you went back to the pyramids, you probably find them building in very much the same way as you'll find someone building now.
Using very similar materials.
Using similar materials, similar tools, and doing things in a similar way. But that's really quite an odd phenomenon. What we are beginning to see within construction is people thinking, well, hold on, do we actually need to be physically in the place where we're building? Do we need to build on site? Perhaps we could build off-site, assemble it in a sort of warm environment where we can control exposures, where we can measure everything. And that's good for health, but it's also good economically. So if you think about one of the major problems in terms of construction is getting the right materials or the right expertise on site. If you're building off-site, you've probably got the materials in the storage. You've got your architects and your specialists on tap, and you can actually draw upon that. And talking to one of the major construction firms a few weeks ago, they were saying not only has that made a big impact on their bottom line and fewer mistakes, less stress, but they've got people working in steel fabrication who are working 10 years longer than their normal working life. They wouldn't be able to work out in the field. They'd have to go away from their families, stay in hotels, and not just men, but women working longer in the metal trades within construction. That's got to be good news for everyone. So longer working life, less benefit costs, more efficiency, less delays, and effectively producing a better product. So the economic benefit overall of focusing on health as one of the drivers to rethink the models about how you do other things, that's just a catalyst for better change and doing things the right way.
Okay, Kevin. Can I just ask you a question now about mental health and how occupational hygiene is interface in the mental health arena? So we all understand mental health. We all have mental health, good or bad. We all have experiences. The COVID pandemic, I think, brought mental health to the front of sort of the agenda. Whilst we're fighting the pandemic and going through various lockdowns, I think everyone in society realised that we're all vulnerable in terms of our own mental health. We've all got varying levels of resilience, but we're all ultimately vulnerable to poor mental health. And it's a very big deal on the sort of health and safety agenda right now, and as it should be. Where does occupational hygiene interface with mental health, and what do we have to offer?
So obviously what contributes to people's good or bad mental health is so many different factors. And that could be family life, it can be relationships, and the workplace is one of those essential elements. But controlling the workplace for better mental health is really rather hard. Obviously, there's an international standard for psychological safety, ISO 45003, which is very helpful. And in the UK we have the stress management standards. So there are guides to how you can influence mental health. But mental health is about human interaction, and that's very hard to regulate effectively in the workplace. So for an employer, how do you really make sure that you're focusing in on ways that you can make a huge positive impact? Well, one very obvious way is to control the things that you can influence. So if you look at one of the major causes of poor mental health, regardless of relationships, etc., it's things like sleep. So how we manage fatigue, how we manage sort of people's ability to go home and get a decent night's sleep. Well, one of the great influences is back pain. So the stresses and strains that we put on the body through manual handling, things like that, have a huge impact on short-term and long-term back pain. The association between back pain and depression is very, very high. The association between back pain, then the medication that's needed for it, and then consequent medical disorders, mental health disorders, is quite high. So a very simple thing, in terms of making sure that manual handling is managed well, has a disproportionate impact. If you talk to people, I think there's a recent survey that 1 in 3 people have long-term pain, and that has a huge impact. We can do something in the workplace around that. Or another example is hearing loss. So we tend to sort of think that as you get older, your hearing deteriorates, but your mental health also deteriorates, and those things aren't linked. Well, all the latest research seems to suggest, well, actually they are linked, and in some ways, a lot of the diagnosis of things like dementia actually arise out of people's inability to process and hearing. And all of the evidence within the workplace shows that hearing loss or hearing and loss of perception leads to depression.
Yeah.
So there's a direct correlation by decibel to the increase in depression levels, anxiety, which obviously impacts people's ability to deal with stress, feelings of isolation. If you can't hear, then you tend to get excluded. And those feelings of isolation then meaning that you can't contribute. And that in turn has an impact on people's performance, their attendance, etc. So you take muscle and back pain, you take hearing loss, and then you just take general health exposures. If you talk to someone who works in an industry where there is a high health risk, a high risk of cancer, if you talk to someone and you sort of say, what do you worry about? Somewhere along the line, they might not be consciously doing something about it, but they're at the back of their mind, they know they're in a dirty industry, that's going to make them ill, and they worry about their short-term job security. Am I going to be ill next week and not be able to earn? And their long-term health, am I actually going to be able to play football with my grandkids? Am I going to be well enough to enjoy a retirement? And that underpinning pressure is a sort of a fundamental sort of driver for poor mental health. And if you take the combination, and this is especially in, if you like, less glamorous trades, if you take the combination of a dirty workplace where there's insufficient protection, a noisy workplace where there's not really hearing protection, and one where you're engaged in a lot of physical activity, this is a recipe for very, very, very bad mental health and very bad performance as a consequence. And for a lot of these industries, by dealing with the immediate challenges of the physical health, by using good occupational hygiene principles, then the mental health challenges that they face and they need to manage are significantly reduced. So everybody wins all round in those circumstances. And in those environments, occupational hygiene can really deliver in a way that very few other interventions on mental health can do in a provable, measurable and controllable way.
So a very clear role for occupational hygiene in preserving people's mental health and well-being.